Hi, and welcome to episode 11 of Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. Today, we're joined by Siadhal Magos. Siadhal, how are you today?
I am doing very well. Thank you, James. How are you?
Good. And so we have some very exciting topics to discuss today. And before we actually jump into all of that, I was hoping that you could share with everybody a little bit about your background and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey again, I'm Siadhal, one of the co-founders and the CEO at Metaview. My background has always been in product management, always for internet companies, and been working on Metaview for the last 4 years. Our mission, we want to power people decisions with the truth. What we are is a leading platform for driving the quality of interviews at modern high growth companies. So we really focus on helping organizations level up the quality of their interviews. And our big thing really came from my experiences personally. I was at Uber before co-founding Metaview, is that we really saw that when you're hiring at scale, it's basically impossible to keep interviews high quality and consistent. There are just too many different interviews run by too many different people in too many different geos for too many different roles for anyone to really stay on top of the overall quality of that machine. And that results in obvious, really negative consequences, like missing out on the best people and hiring some of the people who aren't a good fit for your company. Those things are super painful. They really damage the business velocity when you make those mistakes, and they really damage the culture. So what we do at Metaview is we aim to give companies visibility into what is actually happening in their interviews, i.e. we record and transcribe interviews at scale across the company, and then generate unique data and insights, and really importantly, training flows to help interviewers calibrate and improve. All about leveling up those quality of interviews using technology.
So is it to some extent, this call recording and creating data based on that? Is it in some regards, is it similar to Gong, like what Gong is doing for sales intelligence, what possibly your team is bringing to recruitment intelligence?
Yeah, that's a really fair analogy. There's definitely quite a lot of differences actually at the product, at the sort of application level, in terms of what features make sense in those different use cases. And obviously, as a company, we're really passionate about helping organizations build amazing teams, and so there's a different outcome that we have in mind. But it's a fair analogy given the context. And actually, right. we really quite increasingly like that analogy, because the reason sales conversations make a ton of sense to record and coach around and measure is because there's a very clear outcome that you want, and there's an expected structure of that conversation. And so if you sort of take a few steps back and think, well, what other conversations in business, is there a desired outcome, and is there a certain expected structure? Like number one on the list, the most common, consistent conversation type that has characteristics like that is interviewing. So very, very similar in that way.
Yeah, in that specific regard. Cool. Well, yeah. So I think what I would love to kind of learn more about is how does this tool kind of sit alongside the tech stack, right, with a potential like an applicant tracking system? Because before I dive into some of the specific topics that we wanted to talk about in regards to optimizing interview process to achieve better outcomes, it would be helpful to know kind of the point of impact of your product. So then we can it just help me get a better pulse of the point of impact prior to jumping into other specifics.
Yeah, completely. The headline is I think you used the phrase, how does it sit alongside them? Yeah, that's the answer. It sits alongside them. So it's not a replacement for any of those tools. The applicant tracking system is still the sort of system of record, and often the piece of software our customers use for scheduling interviews. We are an application that sits on top of that, and on top of whatever video conferencing solution you use. So you don't use Metaview to actually run the interview. Metaview just passively records the conversations that are already happening, scheduled by your ATS and over Zoom. The reason that's the right approach is really important to us, and frankly to our customers, to not just be a tool for recruiters, right? If you want to really understand what's happening in your hiring process, and you're trying to build a high-performing, consistent, high-quality interview process, you can't just capture the recruiter's interviews. You want to capture the vertical slice. You want to see the candidate from end to end, all the way to the point of the final interview that results in the decision. And to do that, you then have new stakeholders to consider, which are every interviewer in the company. And these people are not going to learn a new tool just for running that type of a conversation, right? They're going to expect to use the same tools that we're already using. So yeah, really important to play seamlessly with the existing stack. And yeah, we have a piece of software that records the calls, and then to view the transcript and to view the analytics and the sort of the insights and the nudges that we provide, you go to Metaview's app. So it's separate to Greenhouse at that, or sorry, separate to the ATS at that point.
Sure. So does your product have to, or is it ideal that it integrates with the ATS? Or because I know one of the challenges, right, is there are so many different ATSs out there that's probably from an integration perspective could be quite challenging. So how does that work, right? I mean, there's obviously the big players in growth stage, like as you mentioned, Greenhouse, which is actually my favorite, right? So there's a few front runners, but it's an incredibly fragmented space. So how do you go about working alongside so many different providers out there?
Yeah. I mean, it's not nothing. It's definitely like it's a part of our roadmap to make sure we're on top of the various integrations we need that make sense for our target customer. And so yeah, we have a handful of direct integrations with various applicant tracking systems. We also have a couple of ways of integrating with scheduling systems, so things like Calendly and like other tools that are often used for scheduling interviews. And then there's also the calendar, which is the source of truth for some people as well. So it's not actually only the applicant tracking system. The applicant tracking system is, I would say, highly valuable integration with a customer, but not required for our product to work.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is all just super helpful context. So now we can kind of get into actionable things to help people get the best results. But it just helps me kind of understand the point of impact that you're coming from when you're working with growth stage and mid-market organizations. So I guess like the biggest question I have is, what have you learned from the data thus far, right? Like, what are the biggest holes and challenges that you see growth stage organizations making in the interview process? Like, what are the biggest opportunities for improvement right now?
Biggest is a great question, and I think the reason it's a little bit, I'll probably end up giving more than one, is just because there's a number of stakeholders in there's a number of users of our product. There are the end interviewers, the people who actually run the conversation, and what do they sort of benefit? What have we learned about how to sort of help them best? There's the hiring managers who are responsible for like the final decisions on candidates, and same thing, like how do we help them best? And then there's the talent acquisition team who sort of care about the health of the machine as a whole. And you need to do work. You need to provide value to everyone in that value chain. Otherwise, your product's not gonna like experience the growth and expansion we experience with customers at the moment. So yeah, there's a couple of answers. I would say the number one thing that we've learned about at that sort of more strategic talent acquisition level is the importance of being able to make appropriate comparisons. So telling a super high growth, like say a company that's just raised a couple of $100 million, let's say, growing over 100% in terms of headcount year on year, telling them that hey, overall your interviews don't seem to be that consistent. That's like not a useful piece of information. Great, we can get that piece of information now. What's really useful is when you can tell me the specific pockets of my organization where I have inconsistency issues, or where I have overburdened interviewers, or where I have highly experienced interviewers who are interviewing very differently to the next generation of interviewers within their department. And so you have no reason to believe you're going to have like a consistently great team in future in that world. So really being able to hone in on like the specific pockets of where there may be quality issues has been like a big realization. We sort of started in this world where we gave these very aggregate level insights and analytics, and it definitely got people excited, got people leaning in, and it was enough for people to start to generate their own hypothesis about maybe how they can change their interview process within their companies. But where we're really seeing the magic is when we get down to the sort of much more granular level. It's almost like not big data anymore. You're sort of really, even if the N is smaller, you're giving people some a much richer insight with which to start to, apply their judgment to. So that would be I think the biggest learning from the sort of the more strategic talent acquisition perspective. On the interviewer and hiring manager side, our biggest thing really is bringing that time to value down. So the interviewers tend to be interested in their own data from like a self-reflection perspective. But of course, if after an interview, as an interviewer, you get told, hey, you spoke more than 60% of that interview, and that's more than you usually do with any other candidate, you might want to have a think about that and see what to do differently next time. Or you ask very few questions in this interview versus, compared to other people who run this interview in your company. That's a really good self-reflection moment for sure, like very powerful. But where it gets really, where we really sort of take it to where you can really take it to the next level is actually do the level of synthesis for them of what to do differently next time, like specifically, like ask questions more like this, or say this during your introduction. And so we have this, this realization essentially that while some people within these high growth organizations do end up being super nerdy about being great at hiring and great at interviewing, that's obviously not the majority. The majority, they want to be good at interviewing, but they also have a ton of other meetings they need to get to and a ton of other objectives they're working on for the rest of their working day, and they really want that synthesis for them. And people end up being much more open to like clear suggestions of what to do differently in their interviews than we actually first expected. We thought that would be dodgy ground to go onto, like telling people what to do. Actually, it's not the case. If you get the messaging right, people are very happy to be sort of coached essentially on what to do differently.
So how does the tech, like, how would you go about, so basically you notice an inconsistency, I guess, like, is the data measuring success by the percentage of candidates that go through to the next round? So for instance, or is it based on some kind of like quality of hire metric? I mean, when the system is giving the feedback saying, mention, XYZ in your intro, or ask more questions, like how is it determining what good looks like?
Yeah. So two sources. One is our own proprietary framework and syllabus for what good looks like. So this is something that we have designed based on, frankly, the data we've gathered over the last couple of years being live with customers, alongside members of our team who sort of constructed this proprietary framework. That's based on things like what we've seen historically in terms of number of questions and types of questions that tend to result in a more efficient funnel further down the funnel, or types of questions and types of conversations that tend to result in a candidate accepting an offer when it gets extended. Insights you can only derive when you have sort of historic data, combined with our own sort of Metaview's own perspective on best practice in interviews, which is much more sort of experience driven than necessarily data driven in that context. So that's one area of sort of where that knowledge comes from. It's like Metaview's knowledge. Mm-hmm. And then the other area is the customer's own. So if you think about any high growth organization, we could come in as Metaview and say, hey, you're doing hiring wrong. A good interview looks like this, this, and this. And we'd be naive to be telling a high performing, successful organization that that's the case. Really, what they will do is look at their organization and say, hey, James is a really awesome representative of our culture here. We know he's great at hiring because he's made great hires. We want more of our people to be like him. And so there you are taking the organization's own, almost, you can think of it as user-generated training content and saying, hey, we know James is great. We as an organization have decided James is a great interviewer. We want more people to be like James. We're going to train people based on James's historic interview recording. So you can literally say, hey, James has identified this is one of his favorite interviews where he felt like he did a great job. The next generation of people who are going to start to hire for this role, you're all going to listen to 2 of James's interviews before you get unleashed on real candidates. Super simple, super high impact way to get more people aware of what great interviewing looks like in your organization.
Yeah, I think so. That's, I think, the key, right? Like being able to reference like hiring managers or recruiters that not only are getting the best conversion rates and offer acceptance rates, but also looking at quality of hire, right? Because exactly. you can look at like a contingent agency recruiter that might have a really high offer acceptance rate, but they also might have a really shitty like fall off rate, right? Where 10 to 20% of the candidates that they're placing are falling off within the first 3 months, right? So it's like how to, I think the challenge with any kind of like optimization tool, data tool for anything when it comes to the interview process or quality of hire as a primary outcome is, how do you ensure that the conversions, right? Because it's like recruiting is constantly like beckoning with one hand, like, and then also kind of like holding back with the other. Like you're trying to get people interested, but then you're trying to protect the quality, in terms of getting the best fit individuals. And I feel like that's a lot of the times the challenge and saying, okay, how do we kind of optimize this, leveraging technology and data, is figuring out, like the balance between those two things, at least in my opinion, right? And I see like I think a lot of the tech out there, they solve they're attempting to solve this problem, like the velocity and like the quality of the process. But I think the key part, like that you mentioned from my perspective, is being able to plug in, okay, who are the most effective hiring managers that have a really high quality of hire across the board for their team, even if that isn't necessarily like, how are you defining quality of hire? How are they pulling that? But just even if it's more of just like an understanding within the organization that they are managing a high performing team, and then being able to plug their kind of knowledge and process back into data to guide others. I feel like that's a really critical piece for my perspective.
And actually, you're sort of like bringing me back to maybe another like key learning, which is being like very open to like our customer organization's input in the way that you described. It is unrealistic to think that right away a piece of software is going to tell you these are your best interviews for sure, these are the people who make the best hires. No, you're going to have institutional knowledge, you're going to have some tribal knowledge that an organization is going to make a judgment based on, and like is going to make a bet based on like that judgment. And we're like, I think that you get the best results when the product, in our case Metaview, is super adapted to that. If folks at company X, customer X, say that we want more people to interview like this person because we believe that they are good, like they should be entitled to feed that into our products, and they do. It's not like Metaview is this all-seeing eye that can knows better than the people in the organization. We're there to help folks in the organization do the thing that they're trying to do, but better. We're not necessarily trying to change, like completely change how they go about the interview. It's like give them much better iteration loops, give them much better ability to have leverage and impact over the interview process. Because right now it's such an unmanageable beast that it tends to by most organizations be a little bit unloved. Even though if you're a again like a 500 person organization growing to 1,000 people, your people are going to spend tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of hours a year interviewing to get there. And so to not sort of try and impose some degree of deliberateness over that process is pretty crazy.
So from my perspective, and again, like just like my point of impact working with growth stage tech companies, not every company has those individuals that are performing at a high level when it comes to interviewing, right? Like I think and I don't know your product very well, just from all I know is based on what we've discussed on this call. But, I would assume that it's like, okay, if you have like a reference point, right, of, okay, this is what leads to results. Like for instance, at Secure Vision, our head of delivery that oversees all of our recruiting team is an incredible interviewer. She is just so good at spotting top talent. And we've been able to just stack our team with A players, right? As a result of how she goes about interviewing our team. But on the other hand, there's a lot of companies out there that may not have that type of hiring manager or leader within the organization. And then it just becomes like, it's, I guess, the data of your kind of an aggregate or understanding of best practices really kind of matters more, because if it's just pulling data off conversion rates and offer acceptance rates, that doesn't necessarily drive quality of hire and ensuring that you're getting the best fit individuals in. Like there has to be some kind of external data input driving best practices, because then it's just like, okay, we might accelerate or push people through, but are we actually getting the best fit individuals that, particularly for a growth stage company, are really going to help us scale, right? Versus just sustain what we already have. So can you talk to me a little bit more about that? So like, let's say you go into a 500 person growth stage tech company and they just really don't have the expertise when it comes to, hiring and interviewing, and they're seeing low quality of hire, they're seeing higher turnover. Can this tool like elevate the quality of hire for those organizations as well? And like, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right that sort of that relationship does exist. Our customers all tend to be of the same like broad ilk that are sort of essentially competing for the same people. So you do often see a low quality process in the numbers in terms of offer acceptance or speed with which you get hot candidates through the pipeline, whatever it may be. So there usually are some tells that there's a problem here. But in the case where the numbers look good, it's just you're hiring people who are not as high performing as another company, Metaview still provides you with industry benchmarks. So although you have your intra-company benchmarks, we will let you know how that compares to other companies on our platform. Anonymously, of course, we don't know specifically which company is where, but we'll let you know what good looks like for other companies on our platform. So you always have the ability to sort of cross-reference. Okay, fine, this person might be good relative to our other interviewers, but how are they actually performing given how the complexion of interviews at other companies, and you can still get that insight. And the second thing I'd say is, yeah, our product does it, but also our team does it. Like, we work very closely with our customers to make sure that we are having the impact we need in leveling up the interviews. And that means members of our team working closely with the talent leadership of the organization to make sure we're interpreting the data correctly, making the changes to the process accordingly, and everything you can imagine in between, because we love to. It's the best way to have impact, but also because it means we learn a ton, and our product is obviously developing all the time. And the best way to sort of create really robust learnings is to have real intimacy with the customer.
Yeah, I love it. And I one of the other questions I have is just on the candidate side. So are you going to be developing the data and the actionable feedback in relation to, okay, let's say somebody is interviewing a product manager, right? And the way that the product manager is answering the questions, are you collecting data on that side to provide hiring managers with insights into, like, how well did the candidate do in the interview as well? Is that an element that you're looking at as well, or is that maybe like a further down the road solution, or what do you think there?
We're not so focused on that, to be honest with you. Obviously, as part of the product, organizations have access to the transcript and the recording. So if people want to refresh their memory on what was said by the candidate, so they're not just making their sort of decisions based on guesswork or memory or whatever it might be, then that option is there. Just, it's a utility, it's a function of the product. But from a analysis perspective, I think there's a ton that already focuses on like candidate assessment. What we focus on is quality of process and quality of conversation, quality of interview. So all of our energy goes into that side of the equation at the moment. Okay,
understood. What other, just at a higher level too, like, are you seeing any trends when it comes to interviewing, hiring, trends that you're seeing, in terms of, again, you could answer this a few different ways, like not necessarily in relation to your product, but just overall when it comes to challenges you're seeing your customers face, or maybe the 90th percentile customers that are doing really, really well, and that's making the difference and allowing them to be successful. Just any trends that you could share with us on what you're seeing out there in the marketplace right now.
There's one that is like quite Metaview or interview specific, and then there's others that are just broader trends. I think the broader trend, partially inspired by this move to remote, where the location of a company, for example, is irrelevant now, and the sort of how cushy and glamorous the office is irrelevant now as well, because at most you're going to spend a couple of days of the week there, maybe not even that. So a lot of those differentiators have gone away, which means you're now left with, you have to get creative about how you can differentiate to attract people to work for you, or to identify and attract the right people to work for you. One way to do that, a very expensive way to do that, is to pay more than everyone else, which obviously is the approach some companies take. But really, that's forcing companies to think, okay, we can't really get a competitive advantage in how we source, because everyone's got access to, everyone's online somewhere, and we all have the same tools at our disposal to try and find those people. Where can we differentiate? One of those is in the interview. Obviously, who you actually meet, the human being you meet, or human beings you meet during that interview process, is the only thing that is different about your day. You're going to be sitting in the same spot, looking at the same screen as you were before the interview and after the interview. The only thing that's differentiated is who is the human being you spoke to and what experience you have. But there's other things further upstream and downstream than that. We're seeing a lot of folks, I think, invest more and more in employer brand. Like, how can we make someone have a perception about our company before they even spoke to one of the folks in the organization? Seeing a lot of companies invest a lot in, I guess broadly, I would say, talent networks and talent intelligence, like actually understanding the market and having a pool ready to go to and being prepared to hire before they need the button seats, basically. So I think there's a few things where people are really starting to work out how they can differentiate in their process. because a lot of the other differentiators have gone away. And I think that's one of the reasons Metaview, I think, is working out well for a lot of customers. But there are other areas where that's true as well.
So yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of those similar shifts right now too. Companies are fighting to figure out, okay, how are we going to differentiate and how are we going to stand out and win? We are seeing a bigger emphasis in employer branding, similar to you. Just a much bigger emphasis on quality experience. I think I would love to see more talent acquisition functions and just more companies in general be a little bit more operationally driven when it comes to talent acquisition. I think, we're still seeing, you look at revenue organizations and you see these like large, robust tech stacks, and companies are willing to invest like, millions of dollars a year in, and then you talk about like budget for talent acquisition, and it's like, it's so much less, and it's okay. But, at a high level, what's that?
You say that. I agree. The budget for talent acquisition might be less, but of course, if you flip the mental model, the budget for talent is huge. It's the majority of what any company spends cash on is the people they hire. So like, it is still like a complete truth for these organizations that they know who they can bring in is who they can bring in and retain is existential. I think the shift that we're seeing, and we're a part of it, but again, there are other parts of it, is the reason that you will see these more, the increase, essentially talent acquisition having a bigger seat at the table strategically, potentially having bigger budgets just for talent dedicated to the acquisition of new talent, is because now it's actually a measurable part of, it's now measurable. Like it used to be that every other part of the company was measurable apart from how you hired people. That's changing. And when you start to have data, it means you start to frankly have more attention, you have more accountability, you have people who are, you have better sort of transparency into who's actually doing a great job and who's not. And so suddenly you get this flywheel of like increasing like performance levels within that function. I'd say at this stage, that's probably more of a theory than it is a fact. I think it's like it's something that will take a while, but I see no reason why that won't be true, right? We're going to have a score. The scoreboard is pretty clear, and that's going to bring out better performance.
Well, I think it's just too, it's like there's a difference philosophically or maybe strategically, you could say, in some organizations that they're still, they see talent acquisition as more of a transactional motion where they're going through a big hiring surge. Okay, now we have to increase budget because we're behind on talent acquisition goals, versus organizations that are truly getting the best outcomes. They're being a little bit more strategic and thinking long-term about talent acquisition, and they're open to making the right investments because they understand, okay, even if hiring does turn out to be somewhat cyclical for my organization, I understand by laying the right foundation and getting the right tech in place, the right process in place, and optimizing that, I'm ultimately going to be able to get the best fit individuals on my team on a consistent basis. So it's still I'm still seeing a split between those two kind of modes of thinking, right? Like unfortunately, we've been able to kind of tailor our pitch and our online positioning to try to avoid the companies that are still looking at talent acquisition in a transactional way. And, a few years ago, we had a lot of customers that quite honestly, we probably didn't see exactly eye to eye with, and we just kind of adjusted our model to the point where our model doesn't even necessarily appeal to companies that view it that way anymore, right? Like we've just gone so strategic and embedded in terms of the solution that we're providing. And we're on the services side, but for us, we've really just kind of gone all in with working with organizations that are committed to doing this the wrong way, that are thinking long-term, that are using and leveraging data and tech and process to optimize. So I think we're seeing more of it now, which is great. And, we'll see if it continues to trend in that direction. We continue to see more data and better tech. I think we're going that way. I hope it's adopted at like a large scale with the vast majority of tech organizations. That's still the part that I feel like's kind of up in the air. Like, are we going to see that level of adoption to data and tech that we see in revenue functions? Are we going to get there? And I think we will, right, to some extent, but that's what I'm really curious to see play out over the next few years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think we see analogies in our customer acquisition where it's maybe a little bit different to your business, but correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, where of course, Metaview being a software product means it can be sort of applied to customers of different, that maybe have different philosophies, different strategies, or different objectives even. But we definitely have, our roadmap is aligned with, and we have most success with customers who have made the bet that high quality interviewing is important. And there's other customers sometimes we win or work with where what they're more interested in is sort of like keeping an eye on things. And it's like that's a different outlook, right. You know. As I say, we're more on the former side, and we get more success, we get more excited, and you know, we do still have some decisions to make about customers we take on, and it's not that, you know, all customers are not created equal necessarily. We have some that we're really excited to work with, and it's usually in that direction where we get most excited.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, you know, I know we're kind of coming up on time here. This has been a really interesting conversation. I think what you're doing is really important, and I think that you will continue to be successful and continue to grow, because we do need to see a lot more of this in talent acquisition. And I hope that the trends that we're referring to, I hope they turn out to be correct, and that we start to see a larger scale technology and data adoption within talent acquisition, and we start to see, you know, more of that budget focused specifically on the talent acquisition function and commitment to doing things the right way. I mean, you know, again, you ask most C-level executives, they're going to tell you that to some extent they believe people are a primary driver of value. But then when you look at like, okay, how's that reflected in terms of, you know, the robustness of our leadership team and the robustness of the budget and the tech stack and the focus that goes into ensuring that, okay, if people are actually the primary driver of value, is that reflected in how we're optimizing this organization and our priorities? And so I think there's still, like, to some extent a disconnect there. But yeah, I think that we are hopefully moving in the right direction, man, because it's important. We have to do it. And the companies that are, I'm sure, I'd be really interested to see like stats side by side of, okay, before customers worked with you, and then, you know, after like 1 year. I don't know. Do you have any stats like that you could share with us as a kind of a last topic of discussion?
Yeah, we do. And the most important metric is quality of hire. But obviously that's an incredibly hard thing to measure, and which is actually, I would argue, the reason why you see the disparity between, let's say, sales or revenue tooling and HR tooling, because like, what's the output? What's the sort of the undeniably good thing we're aiming for here? It's not as clear on the talent side. So the things that we focus on are a little bit more upstream. Representations of great interviewing. Offer acceptance rate is one. So we have before and afters, 15% increase in offer acceptance rate among organizations that adopt Metaview. Speed of hire. So candidates get through the departments that make use of Metaview, candidates get through the pipeline 28% quicker before and after. A year after adoption of Metaview. And then the last one, which is a little bit softer, to be honest, but in many ways is the one we watch most closely because it's such a direct correlation to the impact we're having, is hiring manager and interviewer sentiment. So every time someone engages with our product, we ask them, hey, does this help you run better interviews? 91% of interviewers say that it does. And that's actually, even a lot of the time, what our customers value most is, hey, if our interviewers and our hiring managers are telling us that this is helping them do this thing, then, you know, that's good enough for us.
Right. You know what? And one thing I was just thinking about too, and I don't know if this is something that comes up in your sales process, but you know, people are leaving jobs faster than ever before, right? So turnover is higher. And so knowledge transfer is becoming a real problem for a lot of organizations. So I was thinking about this also could be a good solution to kind of ensure that there's a proper knowledge transfer. Let's say you have a leader or one of your best recruiters leaves the organization. You can basically more easily transfer that knowledge to new leaders and recruiters coming in, which right now, if, you know, it's not like tenures are going to be getting any longer anytime soon, could be a really good way to ensure consistency as there is turnover within the organization. Is that something that ever comes up in conversation in the sales process?
That actually specifically doesn't, but I think it makes a ton of sense, and I can easily imagine that. Frankly, being something we talk about more now. Just because it's an awesome idea. We've been live with customers for sort of two years. So obviously there's a lot of our growth has been recent, right? So the majority of our customer base actually we've been in seat with for 9-6 months, something like this. So some of those sort of like that churn related behavior we haven't seen a ton of in a lot of our customers. But yeah, I think it makes perfect sense what you just said.
Yeah, well, this has been a lot of fun. I could probably keep talking with you about this for hours to come. So I think we're gonna have to make sure that you can come back sometime soon. But Siadhal, thank you so much for having this conversation and joining us today. This was so incredibly valuable, and you really have some interesting, fresh perspectives that you're bringing to the table. So it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Yeah, right back at you. Really enjoyed it. Cheers, James.
Cool. And for everybody else, thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you next time.